In the intro to my last video, I talked about how Araki said he reached his creative peak at the end of Stone Ocean, and that this led him to restart the JoJo universe with Part 7. Now, Araki actually felt this dangerous contentment with his creative abilities, at least as he puts it, towards the end of Stone Ocean, and changed the ending of the part at the last minute. To quote Araki's afterword of the final volume of Stone Ocean, from an interview in 2009, he said, "We'll go back to the root. The Italian Renaissance was inspired by a return to ancient Greek and Roman concepts. The French painter Gauguin created a new painting by returning to nature in Tahiti. We'll make the standability of the main villain, Father PUCCI, even more powerful. That way, time, the protagonists, and the bloodline itself can make a full cycle of the universe and return to their origin. JoJo's bizarre adventure will abandon modern civilization and return to nature." So, for the first part of this video, I will break down Araki's decision to construct PUCCI as the man who brings about a new universe, and what that says about PUCCI's character and how he interacts with fate. Then, we will have a closer look into Jolyne, in order to see how her methods of combating fate contrast PUCCI's, and see what philosophical lessons we learn along the way. So without any further dilly-dallying, let's do it. PUCCI is such a cool villain to me. I love how philosophical he is and all of his dialogue, and all the quirkiness that he portrays with the prime numbers and the constant jabbering. Like Jolyne, who we shall cover in the second part of this video, he is a perfect fit for the story of fate that Stone Ocean hones in on in order to close the original universe. So, let's begin. First and foremost, PUCCI is a man that wants results. He strives for a fixed life, not only for himself, but for all of reality. Of course, I'm referring to the plan that PUCCI put in place when he accelerated the universe with his stand, Made in Heaven, subsequently making all beings aware of their fates. But why did he want to do this? Is this a situation where the villain has good intentions but a negative outcome? Let's talk about it. As we just covered, the inner workings of fate is sort of the connective tissue of this part, and PUCCI's story is no different. To analyze PUCCI's backstory, we must trace a series of peculiar fates. The first of these strange fates regards PUCCI's birth. To preserve her chances at motherhood, a woman with a dying newborn swapped her baby out with PUCCI's fraternal twin, who she would name West Bloomerine, and who we would know later as Weather Report. Now, as we can see, even in PUCCI's nascent moments, his life was tainted by death. As we will see further on, that characterization is very important for his view of the world. Death is something inevitable, and PUCCI seeks to manifest that inevitability through his stand. So, when PUCCI was a kid, his parents taught him their understanding of what unfolded on the day that PUCCI and Weather were swapped, let's say. Now, I say his parents' understanding as they simply figured that PUCCI's twin had died. As PUCCI learned of his brother's fate, he began to question, why did fate choose him and not his brother? Why do humans experience happiness and despair? What is real happiness? This existential questioning led him to seek the truth of the universe, and combined with the fact that his family had a very rich history in the Catholic Church, PUCCI went off to study in a seminary. This moment is a very important step in his character, as his work in the church allows PUCCI to channel his search for meaning through spirituality by becoming a priest. Well into this training in the seminary, a woman comes to confess in the church. PUCCI insists that he goes and fetches the priest to talk to her, but the woman insists herself that she just wants to talk to PUCCI. She confesses that she swapped her dying newborn out for a twin brother, and as the dreadful possibility dawns on PUCCI, he asks, "Do you know who his real parents are?" The woman says, "A couple named PUCCI." The paneling here is nothing short of amazing. The way that we continuously get closer to PUCCI's face as he realizes the truth of his existence just hits so well. The surprise that Araki creates here really contributes to the theme that no matter how hard you try to wrap your head around fate, just as PUCCI had attempted to do by becoming a priest, you can never fully comprehend it. Nevertheless, upon finding out the truth of his birth, PUCCI goes on to look for a concrete result. That concrete result being the reality of the universe. But think about that response for a second from PUCCI. He's not just talking about space there, he's talking about existence. PUCCI is looking for something absolute, an end-all be-all from the perplexingly large existence we call the universe. I think such a task would drive me crazy. And I would argue it does the same to PUCCI. So keep in mind that PUCCI relentlessly chases an answer to a question that may be larger than him, or anyone, and anything. Going back to his time in the seminary, though, we come across PUCCI's second strange encounter with fate. While closing up the seminary, PUCCI was confronted with a youthful and mysterious Dio. This Dio proposed to PUCCI quite the enticing question. Do you believe in gravity? That there might be a reason why you tripped over me, of all people. Given the simple mismatch at PUCCI's birth, which of course led to the dramatic fracture in life, it's likely that Dio's proposition left a lasting impression on PUCCI. All of a sudden, PUCCI was given a simple way to think about the complex workings of the universe. These complex workings that pulled the strings of his interest in finding answers to his biggest questions. Gravity. And that system of thinking, folks, is how Dio pulls PUCCI into his heretical idea of heaven. Of course, in classic extra Dio fashion, he also healed PUCCI's lame foot. Because why not if you're a magic vampire, right? Seriously though, this interaction with Dio would become crucial in PUCCI's understanding of fate. Reframing fate in such a way that it gives an end goal through the heaven plan put into motion PUCCI's long-term villainy. But we'll talk about that in a bit. Right now, I want to touch on how PUCCI's new mindset descends into that villainy. Namely, when he inadvertently kills his sister Perla, PUCCI's third and final aforementioned encounter with the strange and cruel workings of fate. To dive into this backstory / mini-arc, let's investigate the full scope of the PUCCI-Weather twin dynamic. First of all, Weather is established as someone who takes action. As we will see, the narrator is really quite important throughout Stone Ocean, and Weather is labeled by this narrator as someone who fully believed in the idea of justice. Importantly, he takes action to carry out that justice. We see this explicitly where it matters the most, his introduction. Weather risks his job by breaking the shop's window in order to stop a robber running away with Perla PUCCI's purse. Immediately, this sets up a contrast to PUCCI's actions, which come just 6 pages after the narrator introduces Weather. So what are PUCCI's actions like? Well, PUCCI clearly can't accomplish what he wants by himself like Weather can. He has a strong desire to protect his sister, as only PUCCI knows that Perla, Weather, and himself are all related by blood. But despite these strong feelings to protect Perla, he takes no action himself. PUCCI can only bring himself to manipulate fate, to pull the strings of gravity to get what he wants. So he orders a militia, unbeknownst to him as the KKK, to break up Perla and Weather. Ultimately, this lack of action and attraction to gravity would prove to be PUCCI's downfall, and cause his descent into pure villainy, if he hadn't already. His actions, or the lack thereof, turn an uncomfortable but solvable conundrum into an unforced Shakespearean tragedy. When Perla and Weather are subsequently tortured by the KKK, Perla throws herself off the cliff where Weather was hanged, believing him to be dead. PUCCI, unknowing of the tragedy that had unfolded, arrives on the scene and returns to his existential questioning. Why did things turn out this way? When we were infants, why did that woman take my brother and not me? Why do two people meet? In PUCCI's most vulnerable state, PUCCI remembers his fateful encounter with Dio. He hears in his head, "Do you believe in gravity? That there's a reason why we meet?" Suddenly, PUCCI's attention to Perla redirects as he gazes into the sky. PUCCI says, "It's him. I want to see him." PUCCI is then pierced by the arrow that Dio gave him, and bequeathed with the ability to preserve memory. Perla's heart and soul, that is your ability, Dio's spirit says. The way Dio spiritually descends onto PUCCI is such powerful symbolism by Araki. It brilliantly shows how dependent PUCCI is on the mechanics of the universe, as Dio literally manifests from the heavens to guide PUCCI amid his suffering. I think it's a great visualization of PUCCI's belief. He thought that breaking up the relationship between his sister and Weather had to happen. I say had to happen and not I must do this because PUCCI didn't believe that the action was determined by himself or any of his family dynamics, but by the sky, by fate. PUCCI distancing himself from these horrifying events is subtle, but it's the most convincing aspect of his villainy. This appeal to the gods stems from PUCCI's attempt to understand and conquer the overarching powers of the universe, which, as we mentioned before, typically doesn't end well. No one can play God and get away with it in Araki's universe. Now, PUCCI's revelation that he needs to see Dio greatly strengthens his belief in gravity, aka the driving force of the world that brings people together. But that definition is almost a little too sentimental. It's more of a magnet, smashing the positive and negative points of the universe into each other. As we see in the vignettes scattered throughout Stone Ocean, PUCCI and Dio have a few philosophical dialogues about going to heaven and gravity and what it all means. I think this is where PUCCI gets the idea of a final triumph of life. For instance, Dio tells him, "True happiness lies there, if one is able to get to heaven." He continues, "The true winner is the one that gets to see heaven. I will get there, no matter how many things I must sacrifice." I think the key part of that exchange, again, is the idea that there is a final, constant state of happiness that one is able to reach. I like to think that this conversation with Dio solidified PUCCI's mindset of reaching absolutes in his life. Of course, most consequentially to the story, it also set up the heaven plan, along with its pitfalls. So how about we get into that? Contrary to what you might believe after first reading Stone Ocean, the heaven plan is not that deep. It's just Dio's notebook and the bullet points that he wrote down. That's all. So I want to explain the philosophical missteps, of course, in my opinion, of the heaven plan through my favorite fight from Stone Ocean, Jolyne and the gang versus Rakiel. If that doesn't really make sense right now, just bear with me. It'll be more interesting than me rattling off the bullet points in Dio's notebook, and there have been plenty of videos about that are great and can do it way better than me. And also, I just love this fight, and I am very biased towards it, if you can't tell already. But anywho, let's just do it. To place us in the Sky High arc, PUCCI had just armed Rakiel with the power to control rods, a semi-supernatural species. PUCCI developed Rakiel's ability by forcing him to fully buy into his heritage connected to Dio, while also recruiting him in a sense to achieve the heaven plan. Back in the present, Rakiel takes down the gang's helicopter, flown by Emporio for some reason, and does that to follow PUCCI's orders to stop Jolyne from reaching him in Cape Canaveral. So, after briefly outsmarting Rakiel with some long-range attacks, Jolyne and friends struggle to find out how to counter the rods. Some gory troubleshooting leads the well-read Emporio to figure out that the rods feed on heat, specifically body heat. This, of course, leads to the legendary imagery of Jolyne setting herself aflame in order to direct the rods away from her body heat and into the flames themselves. Side note here, this fight, and actually many of Stone Ocean's fights, have some of the best paneling in the series. Straight up. I mean, how cool is this too? I mean, Jolyne is closing her eyes and using Joestar Spidey sense to hit Rakiel. It just doesn't get better than that, folks. It doesn't. Anyways, though, Jolyne beats the shit out of Rakiel so thoroughly that he ceases to feel pain, and goes in for a final attack by setting himself on fire. It is crucial, though, to remember that Rakiel can't feel the pain of the blazes on him, and he eventually fails to sap Jolyne's body heat when he accidentally leaves his hand on her, directing the rods away from Jolyne and allowing her to get the kill shot on Rakiel. Confusing, but you just kind of have to look at it. My words don't create too much clarification. I linked a free version of the chapter in the description if you want to check it out. But what happens next, as Rakiel withers away, is key. Jolyne wins the battle against Rakiel due to a seemingly random coincidence. Rakiel forgot to take his hand off Jolyne while fighting, allowing her to survive. Jolyne herself never removed the hand, seemingly an odd move in a fight. So was this a coincidence that the universe decided would happen? Or did Jolyne calculate it? This panel answers that question that Rakiel posed to himself. No one knows. Maybe not even Jolyne. And that's the point. The happenings of the universe are beyond our understanding. Emporio is spot on here. The only thing that he can absolutely say is that PUCCI and his gang are doing unmistakably evil deeds, and that must be stopped. Jolyne and the gang's victory is what matters, and that's why Jolyne and friends are our group of heroes. By contrast, Rakiel's downfall, as he cries out in agony, is believing that he can somehow manipulate and take power over fate by serving Father PUCCI. As we see here, for instance, he thinks every little occurrence is a puzzle piece that will eventually culminate in something grand and perfect. Now, if that sounds familiar to our conversation about Dio and PUCCI, then you're spot on, we're on the same page. This absolute trust in fate is a parallel to PUCCI's idea of heaven. Just like Rakiel, PUCCI rigidly believes that if XYZ is accomplished and his spirit evolves, he will have a no-strings-attached eternal happiness in the form of a completed heaven plan. Honestly, that's why the heaven plan is so convoluted. It's quite literally just random ass shit that Araki thought sounded cool. And by that, I don't mean it doesn't sound cool, it totally does. But what I am saying is that the point of the Heaven Plan is to be overcomplicated and not make any sense. It reflects the mental gymnastics that PUCCI does as he coordinates this endlessly complicated plan to control everyone's fate, when in reality, that is something far, far beyond him. As a result, PUCCI's existential problems are never resolved. He never finds that universal truth that he thinks will tell him how the universe works. Like we said, that truth is way bigger than him, no matter what crazy, heavenly stand he develops. In the end, the people with the weak stands broke free by never giving up no matter how dire or what signals the universe seemed to be sending them. Rather, they had faith in each other, and never attempted to understand the workings of the universe. They took on existence as it was dealt to them, taking each battle one step at a time. PUCCI, however, goes out like a baby, whining and screaming that the universe didn't choose him above everyone else to reign as a god. When one can let go of all the signs and fatalism, they can really discover the big picture. The result of PUCCI and his goons' futile task is perfectly conveyed through Raikiel and PUCCI's gory and disgusting defeats. Once again, Araki does not let playing God go unpunished. So, we briefly discussed how Jolyne went up against PUCCI and what seemed to be a doomed situation for the Joestar family. So how about we dive into Jolyne's character so we can better understand the right way to deal with fate, as opposed to PUCCI's. If there even is one to be found. Maybe we'll find one of many. Who knows? Also, I'm definitely going to get sidetracked here and talk about other random Stone Ocean related stuff, so be prepared. But also, who cares? Let's just do it. Okay, so let's talk about the Joestars. The Joestar family, despite their mythical powers, are the greatest reflection of the human experience. Think about it. Every Joestar, and especially Jolyne, are thrown into a conflict they had no part in creating or being involved with in any shape or form. Jolyne, as the last Joestar of the original universe, is the ultimate conclusion to this idea. Think about how the first arc is basically an elaborate plot, orchestrated by PUCCI, this guy who wants to become God, in order to throw Jolyne, who's just, a simple teenage delinquent, into a maximum security prison. I mean, this is a plot, this is a conspiracy. And while Jotaro did get thrown into a pretty wild scenario with stands just kind of, popping out of nowhere, Stone Ocean's case, I think, is more insane. It's more intentional, you know what I mean? And it does have that entire arc dedicated to it. But the most important thing to emphasize here is that Jolyne's story happens to every single one of us as humans. None of us choose to be born, yet we all must face the challenges of growing up and facing the cruelties of a world devoid of any logic. But the beauty of that unintelligible void is that we get to fill it in for ourselves. With the power of action, we can create meaning for ourselves. And through Jolyne's character arc, which we will now examine, Jolyne does just that, and creates a world defined by her own meaning, although probably not in the way that a lot of readers expected, or appreciate, to this day. To start off, one of the best choices Araki makes in Stone Ocean is to have Jolyne have no idea what's going on when she first gets her stand. She's confused with the sound aspect, distracted by the Tom Cruise-looking bus driver, and really just can't control it. As a starting point, I love this, because all of the previous JoJos kinda just spawned in with their stand figured out. Think of Jotaro stopping the bullet and that first scene with Josuke where he's sticking Crazy Diamond through a random dude's chest. Now, I'm not trying to say those stories are bad at all, or those characters are bad. I love both of those JoJos and their stories dearly. But in Stone Ocean, Araki finally takes this already super cool power system and makes it even more dynamic. Okay, so why is it more dynamic? Well, in Stone Ocean, the idea of a stand being a manifestation of one's fighting spirit really comes through, as now we can track how that spirit develops with Jolyne's dynamic character. In other words, it's not a static ability anymore. In the opening of Stone Ocean, Jolyne is already a capable and clever delinquent, as we said, but her fighting spirit had not developed yet, as we talked about with Tom Cruise and all that stuff earlier. The room for growth that is thus created for Jolyne is one of the driving forces of the story, just like Johnny and Jiro's dynamic or Josuke's development in Part 8. The development of her spirit goes hand in hand with her fighting ability. Notably, this is the first time in JoJo that an actual character arc drives much of the story, a trait that, as we said, would carry on into the reboot parts. But don't get me wrong here. It's not accurate to say that the prior parts were worse just because they were driven by other devices instead of character development. Part 1 is driven by a fated duel, Part 2 by a quest, Part 3 by another fated duel, Part 4 by a mystery, and Part 5 by one kid's dream. So, it's not that these parts have an absence of narrative devices, they simply have different ones. Of course, there's no problem in valuing a character arc in a story, but do realize that such values come down to personal preference, and the absence of those preferences do not equate to poor storytelling. For me personally, I think Jolyne's arc is pretty sweet, mostly just because it's cool, but also it's novel to JoJo and gives this part a main attraction to look forward to on each reread. This development also allows for some really cool fights for Jolyne. When Araki said that he was resetting the universe because he had reached his creative peak, I can totally understand why, given the battles of Stone Ocean. Now, for that idea of stands evolving hand in hand with the fighting spirit to create these cool fights. Let's take her first battle for instance. Gwes bosses her around and Jolyne responds with her father's Ora Ora. At this point, she had still not created her own sense of self, she merely carried on her legacy. However, as we shall see, Jolyne is a fighter with a lot of potential. The sight of her dying father, for example, leaves a mark of great change. Think about how Araki contrasts how boisterous Jolyne is with Jotaro's cool collectedness. That difference isn't a coincidence. In fact, Jolyne's behavior is a direct response to her mistreatment as a child. As we see briefly from Jolyne's backstory, she repeatedly goofed around just for a chance at Jotaro's attention. And that is genuinely heartbreaking. I think her very loud and out there personality is an extension of that yearning for love and attention, and at the beginning of Stone Ocean, it's definitely there. In that first fight after Jotaro shows up, she matures after initially fighting with Jotaro and generally being very distressed at the sight of him. But after fighting alongside, and subsequently losing her dad, Jolyne becomes more quiet, choosing to speak with more intention and using her body language to communicate. Let's take a look at this panel. Look at Jolyne here at the start of the fight against Manhattan Transfer and Whitesnake. She's looking away, her eyes are neutral, and her ability goes off almost passively. Now, by contrast, peep this panel from her fight with Underworld. Her hardened eyes pop against the dark scene, and Jolyne's fist drives the movement of the scene. Said differently, she literally clutches her agency. And this is just one example. As you know, this isn't even close to her peak. Jolyne turning her strings into a literal Mobius strip is Araki just going crazy with his imagination, and it reflects how comfortable and skilled Jolyne had become in her own body. This evolved Jolyne gives way for her actions that would break the Joestars free from their fated cycle. Unlike PUCCI's self-centered impositions, Jolyne develops compassion and selflessness to achieve goals not just for herself, but for the betterment of her family and friends. We will touch more on this in a little bit though. We see her growth as well with Romeo. Just think about Jolyne in the beginning of Stone Ocean in general. Understandably, she is freaking out, as she's being put in a high-security prison by means of a conspiracy led by her evil boyfriend. She also got into that situation itself by going along with Romeo's misdeeds. In that moment by the car, she was very distressed and clearly not in control of the situation, causing her to get caught up in the crime. As she comes out on the other side of Romeo's zealous behavior, free from the shackles of the Ocean of Stone, Jolyne symbolically pitches her jacket into the water, asserting her newfound agency. And what's the first thing Jolyne does after claiming her freedom? She goes to even the score with Romeo. So that full circle moment is pretty awesome. With this Romeo scene towards the end of Stone Ocean, Jolyne's energy has transformed into calm control and power over herself. Both the imagery and her literal words to Romeo show how she is a woman on a mission, one she chose to take not for her own benefit, but for that of her family. A big difference from where Jolyne's motivation lied at the beginning of the part. All of these decisions Jolyne makes to grow is why I think she's such a great character. Like we said before, she was thrown into a world of prophecies, fate, and Dio, and while initially stressed out, she chose to adapt through her words, her relationships, and her stand power. But that initial hesitation is special. At that point, in the beginning of Stone Ocean, it could be easy for her to accept defeat, but Jolyne's ability to act creates a path for herself through the quest to save her father. Such a journey is uniquely human, as we said her character reflects. To me, that's why Stone Ocean is so intimate. It's a story about appreciating the spirit of the little humans that inhabit our incomprehensibly large and complex universe, of compassion in the face of divine hubris. Jolyne squaring up in front of the godlike PUCCI, selflessly holding the line for Emporio to do the job she knows is meant for him. That is some of the most profound image crafting I have encountered in a manga. Jolyne's pose here channels the indomitable human spirit, never letting up despite existing within the most horrifying, dark version of reality that humanity could be faced with. Her final words, "Face me, Father PUCCI," serves as Jolyne's send-off to the original universe, and is such a hopeful contrast to PUCCI's entitled attitude. And following Jolyne, front to back, from the depths of her troubled adolescence to the peak of her compassionate adulthood, makes her journey all the more special. Alrighty, that's all I got. I love JoJo, man. It's just too good. In terms of what's next, I'm thinking about doing a Part 9 review, as I really like Part 9 before. It's actually just straight flames every chapter. So I could make individual chapter reviews upon each one dropping, and you would be getting some more consistent videos out of me, albeit shorter. And if you would be into that, please let me know in the comments. Let me know. I need to hear feedback to see if that's worth it. And while you're at it, actually, let me know your thoughts on Stone Ocean. Very divisive part, so, I want to see if this video, how it's turning the tides, maybe. But yes, people were dropping straight flames of analysis in the Steel Ball Run video, so I hope to see some more. Because there's always stuff I don't catch. Many things, actually. But anyways, I will see everyone in the next episode, if you know what I mean. Okay, bye-bye.